does not simply rebuild a product. Amy Jackson said that it takes 3 times as long as you'd expect to rewrite a system. And a colleague of mine at CultureAmp very helpfully said, a rebuild is never finished, only started. Thank you, friend, for your support. So I work at CultureAmp, which is an employee experience platform. It does a whole bunch of things that you don't care about. I specifically work on the performance product, which helps our customers to build high-performing teams, leading to better business outcomes. But you don't care about that either. What you do care about is that this product came into CultureAmp through the acquisition of a Series A startup 6 years ago in 2019. At that time, it was really small, but since then, it has grown to thousands of customers. And in total, these customers run anywhere between 850 to about 1,500 performance review cycles a month. And our largest cycle has around 45,000 employees, just to give you an idea of the scale that we're talking about today. However, the global performance potential market is about $3 billion. That is where we want to go, towards a performance offering that can lead this massive market. There were many compounding, layered technical obstacles getting in our way of getting to that $3 billion leading product. The product was 2 monoliths, one for the front end and one for the back end. The underlying domain model, data model, back-end models, and architecture were all outdated, and our customer needs had evolved a lot since the product was acquired. There were also many other products living in the same monolithic code base, like one-on-ones and goals. Shared notifications lived in there too, so shared concerns like notifications, tasks, authorization, authentication were all enjoying the same space. There was a massive amount of tech debt post-acquisition from trying to scale and iterate the product rapidly. And finally, it contained a lot of early-stage decisions that were right at the time when they were made, but were not right anymore when we were trying to grow this product. There were also 8 teams working in these monoliths with just terrible domain separation. Too few people understood how the entire system worked or how the entire code base worked. Teams would invest weeks and weeks in starting a feature, but then they wouldn't be able to finish it because they would collide with other teams who they thought were working in a totally different part of the monolith. There was very high coupling and very low ownership. That's a real photo, by the way, that I took at an art gallery in Adelaide, Australia. It's by Japanese artist Chiharu Shiota. Strongly recommend if you're ever there. She represents what it means to be human. I think it looks like a messy monolith. Art is in the eye of the beholder, but don't tell Shiota I said that. So these monoliths, at the time, couldn't benefit from any shared tooling or infrastructure as well. All of that combined to a very fearful engineering culture, very low engagement, teams had low pride in their work, they were moving very slowly. Basically, I'm describing not a high-performance culture. These challenges would have seen us grind to a halt and unable to innovate. We needed to invest to ensure that this product would continue to grow and scale and serve our customers for many more years. To cut a long story short, we were stuck in a hole that maybe looks familiar to many of you. So that's why I'm here. My name is Prakriti. I came here from Australia. I think I may have set the record for longest travel to come to this conference. Lauren is nodding. So that was 24 hours of flying to get here, which is a lot of pressure on this one talk. I'm going to take you through our journey today of a full product rebuild to try and get out of that hole I described. I'll share a few key reflections at every step, which will hopefully make you feel a bit less alone the next time that you are in a similar hole, going on a similar journey. Let's begin with the first step then, which was getting to the point where we even knew that we had to rebuild. Before any talk of rebuilding, obviously we first tried everything else, and you've heard some of these ideas in other talks yesterday. Enormous tech debt was like this big, vague, unnamed burden that our stakeholders couldn't appreciate. We identified and classified every last bit of tech debt in the monoliths and ensured that senior leadership, exec, cross-functional partners could all become advocates of this tech debt. We began prioritizing and fixing the tech debt incrementally, but it would have taken forever. And even if we fixed it all, it wouldn't have improved our fundamental inability to iterate on our domain and data models anyway. Next, we tried piecemeal rearchitecture, which was also discussed in a talk yesterday. So within the monoliths, we identified domains that we could re-architect while keeping the monolith around them fully functional. That worked, but it was very, very slow. We needed a bolder, faster move. In parallel with the piecemeal re-architecture, we also tried extracting domains out of the monoliths. But everything was very deeply intertwined in there. We also lacked, at the time, we lacked quick microservice foundations. We lacked shared solutions for platform concerns. So stuff like notifications, email, authorization, account data, employee data, like how are we going to get all of that? There were no shared solutions available. We still tried, though. We set up a small, dedicated Tiger team who picked one example domain, and they extracted it fully, they documented it, and they created patterns for other teams to follow. So it worked, but again, it was very slow. That's also a real photo that I took in Uluru in Australia. I thought it was the perfect metaphor for this because those bricks were very large, they were extremely poor quality, and really high friction. Doing those three things helped us to realize the reality, which is that none of those would get us to where we needed in time to lead that $3 billion market. We basically figured out that we need a huge reset. Now, as I said, I'm going to go through all the steps, and then I'll pause at each step, and I'll share some reflections on what went well and what did we learn for next time. A few things that went well for us in step one. That amorphous statement of, oh no, we have too much tech debt, that turned into a clear classification with prioritization and rough difficulty levels for every single item of tech debt. We then used that list to create visibility among leaders, building a lot of awareness, but also empathy and understanding, because leaders were getting really frustrated that the teams were not making progress, and teams were getting really frustrated, like, why don't you understand? We can't make any progress. Working cross-functionally meant that even if I wasn't in the room personally, my partners and my peers were also able to advocate. And finally, we exhausted all alternatives before proposing the rebuild. We did that with high transparency, which made our stakeholders more receptive to hearing that we actually do need to start from scratch. A couple of things that I've learned for next time, though. Firstly, suggest it sooner. This is a real tricky one. If you suggest it too soon, then leaders assume you're just an engineer being an engineer, you want a fresh start, you want everything to be clean, you want to work on greenfield projects all the time, and they won't take you seriously. But if you leave it too late, then you've wasted valuable time repairing what you could have spent rebuilding instead. And secondly, establishing trust and then seeking permission, other way around, seeking forgiveness, not seeking permission. So we did a lot of the groundwork without asking for any explicit permission. Now that we knew what had to be done, we had to get buy-in from everybody else. So we needed buy-in from the teams who were going to execute the work, cross-functional partners in design and product, from directors and VPs across the business, from exec, and then from the board as well. To get buy-in, first we needed to show where we want this product to go. This is a radar showing everything that a rebuild could unlock for our customers. These are opportunities that were not possible previously. Then we did some blue sky architecture brainstorming sessions. If there were no constraints, knowing what's in the product opportunity radar, how would you architect this system today from scratch? We went really wide, and people came up with many different architecture options.
I really hope you're enjoying this video. Do you know Lead Dev offers way more than this?
I'm a fan of the Lead Dev newsletter. I find really practical knowledge about leadership.
Then I was like, oh, there is this big community here doing all of these content, so let me figure out a little more, let me dig in a little, what do you have?
So make sure you check out leaddev.com.
Then we converged all those into one potential architecture for our rebuilt product, aiming to validate the need for a rebuild rather than ironing out every last detail. We only wanted to see how different would an ideal architecture look. Because if it looked very different, then that kind of makes our case for the rebuild much stronger. So the product opportunity radar and these architecture sessions helped us to get buy-in from the team who was going to do the work. Everything else we tried before the rebuild, the stuff I shared earlier, that helped us to get support from product design and senior leadership. Plus, keeping them really close to this work throughout helped get their buy-in as well. For exec buy-in, you need a few more steps. First, we spoke to an advisor who is external to the business, who has successfully completed a rebuild. But more importantly, they have seen many rebuild failure modes. Then we built a comprehensive exec presentation telling the holistic product story. This last step is probably what got us through that final 20%. We made it very clear that we are not halting customer value for many, many years. While we rebuild the first component, the remaining teams will handle the most critical work. Then we would pause for about a year, and we would go all in on the rebuild. But the broader performance product offering would continue in other ways. So this balanced approach helped us to get exec buy-in and board buy-in. A few things we did well in this stage, if I may say so myself. Talking to that external advisor who had a lot of experience under their belt brought a lot more credibility to our plan. Then a product VP crafted that holistic narrative I described. He put our customers first in the story instead of over-indexing on engineering, even though this was an engineering initiative. We kept our stakeholders close, being very deliberate about who was included in every conversation, ensuring that they were coming with us on the journey so that our ask to them at the end was not a surprise. Instead, they were kind of invested, and they kind of wanted the rebuild too by the time we got around to making the ask. And then slowing down at this step enabled us to go fast later. Couple of mistakes. Slowing down really cost us as well. We worked away from the teams for too long, and that created uncertainty because by the time, while we were doing all this thinking, the teams were still executing on the roadmap, and they had no idea if we were going to stop everything and start rebuilding. I also wish that we had created more spaces for actively debating tech choices. For example, we pivoted away from Hanami to Rails after we had already written some code, which shook a little bit of confidence in what was already a very big bet. We had buy-in now, but it was still a big, risky ask. We proposed that we'll ship one complete slice to customers, proving our new architecture, domain model, tech choices, and timeliness. This first slice carried immense pressure and visibility. It was a company-wide bet, so failure of the first slice could risk failure of the entire initiative. It would probably kill the whole initiative. Those high stakes made it very important to get a strong start. We began by setting some goals. We love setting goals. Can't start without that. On the product side, we wanted to produce a domain model that we can iterate, architecture that supports future use cases, and very clear ownership for teams during and after the rebuild. Well, that sounded too easy, and I like to live dangerously. So we thought, screw it, let's also rebuild all the teams to move really fast, have strong engineering culture and ways of working, high engagement, opportunities for learning, growth, and development. If you remember the challenges I shared earlier that the teams were facing, this is essentially the opposite. And then we were going to do all of this simultaneously in a completely impossible time frame. I know, it's madness. We began by laying out some ground rules or principles. We called the first one like for like. No massive user experience uplift allowed, no big new features allowed. We will only stand up our existing product on a future-proof code base, domain model, using the latest tooling, foundations, design system, and high engineering standards that were available to us. This reduced customer risk, and it prevented continuously changing goalposts from dragging the rebuild out and creating that long tail, which derails a lot of rebuilds. Next, we said we would freeze the monoliths after the first slice was finished, so there would be no drift between the old and the new, no communication allowed from the new back to the old, and we wanted a quick customer migration, so no letting customers languish on the old product for too long. Decommissioning the old was part of our definition of done. And then finally, we resolved to be deliberate in every step we take, investing in setting high engineering and design standards, building high-performing teams as we go through the rebuild. We divided the scope into 6 domains, roughly, and chose one domain for the first slice called self-reflections. We picked this because it's well used by customers, so we would get a lot of real customer traffic, which would validate our tech choices early. It was also in the worst shape of all 6 because it hadn't been touched in the longest. It was relatively isolated, which would allow one team to focus on rebuilding while the other teams continued on the critical roadmap work. That was what allowed us to get exec buy-in. And then it had just the right amount of complexity. So we felt that this domain is a great candidate to help us prove that once we do this, we can also do the remaining 5. We took a few targeted steps to set up that first slice for success. We created a Goldilocks time frame, long enough that we do it right, but also tight enough to force smart trade-offs rather than gold plating. We started with a small A team of sorts, mixing strong performers, domain experts, specialists from across the org like front-end tooling, back-end tooling, and design systems. I feel like this GIF reveals my age, but my original GIF was the A Team, which is even older than this one. I can't remember what this comic is called. Does anyone know? Captain Planet, yes, thank you. Haha, you're old too. We were firm on adopting all standards internally and also establishing informal metrics where standards didn't exist while still maintaining speed. We also ran an internal PR campaign because like an initiative like this feels very risky, ambiguous, too hard, too ambitious, and we needed to zhuzh it up a little bit, generate some hype, generate some excitement. Most of that worked. We managed to ship the first slice. We didn't ship close to the initial target that was suggested by exec, but we did ship very close to the first estimate that came from the team. This was the most crucial step of all, so I'll share a lot of reflections here, adding to the goals, principles, and the success criteria that I shared previously. Firstly, we created a very clear decision-making framework. It helped us to get clarity on the decision, who is the decision maker, who do they need to consult, engagement model with senior leadership stakeholders. This prevented bottlenecks in seeking approval for everything, and it empowered the team to move fast and make bold choices. We also had really firm trade-off conversations, aggressively protecting the scope while taking on informed risks. The Goldilocks timeframe forced everyone to think really hard about what's good enough. Getting strong exec buy-in led to clear prioritization, which got us capacity dedicated across the business, not just our teams, which we needed because we had 18 dependencies and other teams outside of our own. And finally, we invested very early in building a new domain model for the entire product, including key leadership roles in the conversation. It was a tough ride, so lots of mistakes made and a lot of lessons learned. The initial target date and high visibility created a lot of team stress. Establishing momentum was hard for them because they were thrown into the deep end with a whole bunch of new people and given no time for forming, storming, all those steps. They did refinement and estimation very late, which further impacted their momentum and engagement. And this was the business's biggest cross-team initiative ever at that point. We lacked maturity in dependency planning, managing complex, multi-year, multi-team projects. But thanks to this initiative, we now have frameworks for all of those things. Now, with this rebuild being like for like and looking fairly invisible to the customer, how do you measure success? That brings us to our fourth step. We couldn't measure success in the usual ways, like validating hypotheses, product analytics, customer adoption, revenue, things like that, that we know and love. Instead, we decided to go with engineering and customer experience metrics as a way to measure success. Just got to wait for him to finish drawing the thing. There we go. So think back to these goals that I shared earlier and the like-for-like principle. We wanted the new experience to feel similar, but better. But we also wanted teams to feel proud of their work, like they're high-performing, they're delivering high-quality products at high speed. We used largest contentful paint time as a simple proxy for the customer experience metric. There were a few heavy features that dealt with a lot of data, so we measured the performance of just these features, assuming that if these are improved, we don't need to check all the features. The front-end deploy time used to be 20 to 40 minutes. It came down to under 10 minutes. The back-end deploy time was 40 minutes to an hour. That came down to less than 5 minutes. So that told us that the developer experience had improved a lot. We also made massive improvements to design system adoption and accessibility. The old product had 560 UX issues sitting in the design backlog, and even though the rebuild was like for like, we actually did fix most of those. Lessons are very easy. Everyone loves metrics. So we showed that even though we are building like for like, we're still delivering measurable customer value and business value, anything to make that ongoing buy-in smooth and easy. I did make a couple of mistakes here, so we struggled to measure some of these because the old version is really hard to work with. Obviously, that's why we're rebuilding it. I wish I had invested more time in instrumentation upfront. And I also wish that I had set up specific metrics to instrument the key trade-off decisions. This was a hard journey, but we shipped the first slice, gained confidence we're on the right track, had a massive project retro, and paused for celebration. Not too long of a break, though. We immediately had to pivot to what's next. 1 down, 5 to go. Project's done, right? No, we had to take everything we learned from the first slice and turn it into a plan for the remaining 5 slices. I didn't have a plan. We had done just enough big picture thinking to validate the need for the rebuild and to ship 1 slice. Remember when I showed you this product opportunity radar? We went back to that. First, we extracted from it potential future opportunities. It was important to never lose sight of why we're doing the rebuild. It's easy to get lost in technical details, but we needed to continuously remind ourselves, what does this rebuild need to unlock to be considered a success? More brainstorming, so we considered potential architecture options, this time for all remaining 5 slices, and we included key leadership stakeholders again. Now that we could freeze the monoliths and put all 4 teams on the rest of the rebuild, we needed to overlay potential team structure options on top of the architecture options. That's the crude circles in the screenshot. Please don't judge. This was supposed to be an internal document, and I'm not known for my design skills. And don't take any photos of that one, it's embarrassing. Then we considered different stakeholders' perspectives on what we should optimize for. This helped to surface unspoken priorities and build alignment. Finally, we pulled it all together. I present to you the plan. So think of this in layers. The bottom layer is the anticipated product roadmap, then architecture options, and then ideal team structures for fast iteration, domain ownership, and high performance. The plan needs to work across all those layers. Let's fast forward a few months. We ended up completing the rebuild in 3 big slices. Hooray. That's real footage of me going through those few months. A few things that served us well in this stage. So the overlay method of looking at all 3 success factors simultaneously, product, architecture, and team, that was a bit unusual, but it allowed us to see trade-offs clearly. Having clarity and shared understanding on what everyone was optimizing for helped us to find an option that worked across all attributes. We set cultural expectations of frequent change and asked teams to be agile. And having all teams focused on one initiative was a rare gift, which we leveraged. We struggled with the change too, though, so no matter how much you set expectations, not everyone can be equally resilient to change. The visibility and pressure that I thought would decrease after the first slice somehow exponentially increased. I don't even know how. And the ambitious timeline required a level of laser focus that I have never seen before. We were continuously holding the line and saying no over and over again, including to some very senior people. The last 20% is the hardest. So we had an end-of-year target, and we actually finished before Christmas, and we came back in the new year to roll out, which brings us to our last step. We planned to roll out from early access program to general availability in a very standard way. We'll go by customer segment, we'll do small enterprise, small business, medium business, and then enterprise at the end. We'll have a little break between each segment as a buffer in case things go wrong. You know what this plan looks like. Everyone's done a version of this before. But of course, so much shit went down. Oh my God. Some of the issues we had anticipated, many of which we had not. So what did we learn? A few things that went well. Automating migration and orchestration was extremely important, and I'm really glad we invested in that. Sticking firm to our principles in spite of pressure. So principles like, we will roll forward only, there will be no communication back between from the new version to the old version. Really glad we stuck to those. And then being bold. Things going wrong and plans needing to change is okay, it's better than an original timid plan, which would never have even gotten off the ground. Learned a lot of lessons at this stage. Assume that things will go wrong until the very, very end, even when the last customer is being migrated and you think that you're safe, you are not. Build very deep shared understanding and empathy with support, account execs, and coaches, and do it early rather than needing to do it at crisis time. Fixing product bugs was surprisingly super easy and super fast. But fixing data transformation bugs required remigrating all the accounts that had been migrated until that point all over again. And finally, the environment during the last customer migration was vastly different from the environment during the first customer migration. But all the gray hair was totally worth it. We succeeded in this massive, ambitious bet, rebuilding both the product and the teams to be high-performing as planned. Now we are solving the most important customer problems with high speed and high quality. We're also leveraging these foundations for innovation with things like AI that wasn't even on our radar when we started this rebuild. So, they say that rebuilds are always a bad idea, and I'm sure you heard that in quite a few talks at this conference. I disagree. I say that if you have a domain model that can't take your product forward, you have teams that are stuck with Series A decisions band-aided over and over again, your teams are grinding to a halt, you have tight coupling, you have an underperforming product in a huge potential market, and you have already tried everything else, then a rebuild could be your best bet. You could do it with steps that look something like this, and you could incorporate what I shared before, the lessons that worked well for us and the things that didn't work well for us. However, if these conditions are not true for you, then I can't help you, you're on your own, and I'm sorry you were stuck here for 25 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. That doesn't necessarily mean that a rebuild is not for you, but you might need to look at the steps I shared, the things that worked well for us and that didn't work well for us, and then, tweak how you can make those work for your specific situation. But I mean, yeah, it could also be that a rebuild is not the right decision for you. I don't know, I just work here. Please come find me at office hours if you want to chat. You can also message me on LinkedIn or DM in the Lead Dev Slack. Thank you.